I'm Ren, and I co-chair the Urban Design Committee, and we work on projects like this, and we collaborate with our professional peers, and we're really excited to have everyone tonight. So before we begin, it's important to recognize the injury this highway project caused West Baltimore neighborhoods. The construction of the highway ripped apart African-American communities under the guise of progress. Those of us who were not survivors of the highway to nowhere can only imagine what it was like to be impacted in such a way. But we can still work alongside Baltimore residents who have never stopped advocating for their neighborhoods. As many of you know, this geography has been the subject of countless plans, ideas, and opinions over the years. Starting in the mid-20th century, planning favored urban renewal, bulldozing vibrant neighborhoods in favor of highways and high rises. In the 1970s, a plan to cap over the highway was published. It promised schools, housing, and even a grocery store, but it was never realized. As the decades rolled on, we heard about transformative rail projects. The Red Line would have connected across East and West Baltimore to create jobs, development, and housing. And recently, many of the neighborhoods have produced their own comprehensive plans or are in the process of producing plans. While there have been many plans, the highway has remained a remnant of an old unfinished project. Where is that coming from? Oh no, that's okay. I was hoping it wasn't me. All right, that's good. Break the ice a little bit. While there have been many plans, the highway has remained a remnant of an old unfinished project. In late 2021, Congress passed Public Law 117-58, known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Out of that law came an unprecedented funding source dedicated to reconnecting urban neighborhoods. Maryland's elected officials were strong advocates of that bill. Now, with new federal grant funding available, Baltimore City DOT has announced that it will apply for the Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program. Tonight is an opportunity for dialogue and airing out of some of the ideas that have been shared over the last decades and a look forward to what might be ahead. The speakers this evening represent a variety of views. You'll hear from designers who worked on the Red Line, activists who continue to organize in West Baltimore, university professors and their students who explore the geography, and Baltimore's Department of Transportation. Presenters will be given 7 minutes for an elevator pitch about their topic. It's a long elevator ride. Maybe it's in a high rise. We will hold questions until the end. UDC members will keep time, and at the 5-minute mark, the presenters will be notified that they have 2 minutes remaining. We have a lot of folks presenting tonight, so please let's adhere to the rules. And if we do that, we'll have 25 minutes at the end for question and answer, and then 15 minutes following that for mingling and chatting and looking at the exhibition boards that are up around the room. All right, thank you. So Otto Condon is our first presenter.
First the advance.
Okay, yep.
Okay. So I worked on it quite a few years ago before a couple of Republican governors who were detrimental to that line, but was welcome to politics. But I worked with the MTA and FDOT on the Red Line TOD studies, Transit Development Studies, and also the community charrette back in between 2004 and 2009. This is, as an architect, this is one of those projects that words from the community have actually stayed with me throughout my career. We were able to learn from the elders, the community leaders, Hope, Faith, and Zelda. Bob basically talked about the neighborhood down the lower left, what it was before the highway came in. It's a community workshop that lasted a couple days at the local elementary school, which really laid the foundation for the vision for West Baltimore and the road to nowhere. It's also built on, I still remember Monica, one of the community leaders, talking about the parable of the mustard seed, where it may start small, but it really needs to grow. And, we were actually privileged to have workshops with the kids, and it's kind of out of the month of babes, they basically told us what they wanted, a place to grow up, to play, learn, and prosper. The little girl wanted basically a bank so that she could start a savings account with her with her presence. As part of the TOD, these diagrams are not going to go into them, but this is looking at a quarter mile from the station. As everybody knows, it's divided by both the rails. This is West Baltimore, the rails, and the highway to nowhere. And those are the issues. And then the goals. And I do think the goals, they might, everything needs to be revisited. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the issues remain. Questions, do some of the goals remain? And really, it's about rebuilding the community so it actually does serve the aspirations of all the residents, both old, current, extant, and new. One of the things we looked at, this was focusing on the West Baltimore mark, was really you have to build at the heart, revitalize the hearts first, leverage them at the mark station, and ensure that all the redevelopment really does serve the community. These are some images of the ice house, which 15 years, 20 years later remains the same. We really tried to illustrate that, bringing a grocery store, bringing services that basically will serve both the existing residents and the new residents and their families, and even attract new residents, new Baltimoreans, so they can actually help to spur a continuous catalyst for growth. And then, with rebuilding the heart, there's an opportunity to revitalize the corridor, and it actually can extend both left and right. And that's where it was getting into the highway to nowhere. These diagrams on the left, and I think back in 2009 or 2008, it's like we took the roads and what are the different ways to basically get rid of the highway to nowhere. And, unfortunately at that time, it was moving around the furniture. It's like, keep the travel lanes, move the transit, could we fit in development? I think now is a different time. We need to think more aggressively, progressively, and not get stuck on maintaining the travel lanes. Okay. And really to build over the neighborhood, to build over the ditch, to actually reconnect the neighborhood, to kind of restore what was there in terms of the 24 the everyday life, the 15-minute city. And putting it together, this is how you can start to weave back the neighborhood and create a sustainable revitalization. And one of the things we really were talking about is that it's going to require partnership. It's going to require a lot of work. There needs to be a government, agencies that are committed and keep their promises. The community always needs to be engaged, and it's going to take a progressive private sector. And these three together can actually develop, not only plans, but actually projects, which will further feed and be a catalyst for future development. And it's my last slide. I think about this, the kids we worked with. One girl, they're now at the age of having children. So I just want to leave with one thought is like, we as a society cannot fail another generation. So let's try to do something with this grant.
Next up, we have Charles Phillipson.
Hello, everybody. So as Otto said, this all takes ages. So on the red line, we planned for 13 years, and we do this a little chronologically. So he worked in 2007, 9, and we worked in 2010, 2011 on the station area committees that kind of picked it up where Otto left it. So not telling you anything new here, but the highway to nowhere is a result of when Baltimore's headache was considered too much traffic, and when everything was resolved towards the car by highway engineers and by architects that liked high rises. So you see that we have the high rises, and I just show this here because number one, the fantasies of the highway engineers and the high-rise architects did not get fully built ever. So the image, the drawn image shows what was designed, and the right side shows MLK and the high-rises as they were actually built. So it was a little bit better than what they had originally envisioned. But then also many of the high rises came down. It's just to have a positive note on this. It's not like for 40, 50 years, not since the highway was built, nothing happened. There was actually, the high rises came down and Heritage Crossing was built. And the western end of the highway came down, what these pictures show, and were prepared for normal development. Right now you see only parking lots on it. And then we did these station area advisory committees where Sam Jordan will talk about this some more. My firm was a consultant for the West Baltimore Station Area Committee and Harlem Park and Poppleton, among some others, but those were in the highway to nowhere area. And there was a lot of community participation as Otto had already started. We continued that. And the community put together all the strengths in the area. And there were, two topics pretty much emerged. What is an area of stability and strengths that we want to maintain? And what is an area of change? And so this was all labeled. In this case here, we show the West Baltimore area, and I start from west to east. So this is a continuation of the diagram that you just saw after we knew that the red line maintenance facility sits there in the middle. The TOD triangle got a little smaller, but you can see near the ice house, these parking lots would be development parcels, and it wouldn't be just parking lots any longer, and it would be starting to weave together. In Harlem Park, similar, you see at the bottom the diagram where the two bridges are, and the red is where the station would have been, and it shows how disruptive this highway really is in the grid, in the fine grid of the historic West Baltimore communities. But it would have been improved, the bridges, as this diagram shows. The bridges would have green, would have been much more pedestrian friendly, and then you would have been able to get down to the red line station. And then in Poppleton and West Baltimore and the biopark, the red line alignment changed a couple of times. At the end, it was on diagonal Fremont Avenue, but in the beginning, it came down to MLK and turned the corner there. And so we drew up what would happen if we did at this eastern end of the freeway the same thing as on the western end, which is to take the bridges down, the ramps out, and make that a normal, regular urban intersection. And then you would have a lot more connectivity, walkability. And we showed with all these yellow blocks, all the stuff you could build in addition to what is there today, which would be, again, making access to Harlem Park and Heritage Crossing and Lexington redevelopment much better. So that is really, in a nutshell, what these station area committees did. And Sam Jordan will a little bit later talk more about that, how they took it from there.
Thanks, Tom. This next group is going to be fun and dynamic. Christina Murphy is a professor of architecture at Morgan State, and she and her students are going to present for us.
Thank you. Good evening. So we are starting a studio this semester. It's the third year studio for our students, and we are just imagining something. We're imagining the sustainable urban village that will be happening on the highway to nowhere. So basically, we're putting up a scenario. What if there is a catastrophe, like a big earthquake, and everything is destroyed? And we choose an area, and that will be the highway to nowhere. How can we build a sustainable village? What can we create there? What does people want to have there? So my students and I are brainstorming on ways of creating places where people really want to see what they want. And the core part of the project, like the architectural outcome, is a center for urban learning. So we also believe that the future is in the hands of our children, and that's what the students will take care of. The first step is to visualize, to give a vision for this area. So I would like to introduce my students. You guys come up, flip the images. So this was the first image of Utopia, and take the stage. I don't know which one is the second one.
Hello everyone. My name is Tariq Sharloops. I am a grad student at Morgan State University. So in creating this new urban village, this will almost create a brand new neighborhood. This is a 1.2 mile long stretch within the city. So we're going to have to stitch these neighborhoods together while also providing for a new neighborhood. So some of the things that I have researched in my president's study are like Dartmouth College. As you can see here, the materiality of this is very important to me. And it's also dedicated to Black people. We should be very intentional when designing and be knowledgeable of the communities that we are impacting. Another one is the Champs-Élysées mile-long garden, which is in Paris, France. I chose this one because of the organization of the street. And yeah, the reorganization of the street, which will be very important as we reorganize these spaces here. A third is the William Jesperson Children's Center, as you can see here. Some locations here. I chose this one because we are focusing on an early childhood center and because it's so small that this could be replicated at several different locations. So we could actually have more than one early childhood center, of course, in this space. Another one is the Shenzhen Institute for Design and Innovation. So this one is a half-mile-long building in China. So this building you can actually place two of these buildings here, and we can actually place it within the ditch as well. So we can have some of the building above ground and some of it actually within the ditch. And as you can see, there is cheaper materials here, allowing it to be feasible for any private or public developer to take on this deal. Another one is the Taichung Green Corridor. So this is basically like here, I want to introduce a new water system and a new park system because West Baltimore, well, this community needs everything. So, and to include everything, a water system would be very important as North Baltimore, West Baltimore, East Baltimore, all parts of Baltimore are connected some way. Okay, so next, thank you. Talk to me.
Okay. Okay. Hello?
There we go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ella Martinez. I'm a second-year Master of Architecture student at Morgan State, and I'm also an interior architect at WRA in Herbert East. So as you can see here, my title is Design for the People. And in the bottom center, I have what is a piece of the Gando Primary School designed by Francis Curie. And the idea with this is that we focus on the children. So with the Gando Primary School, the idea is that is the traditional classroom setting. And with the surrounding space, sorry, I'm a little nervous. With the surrounding space, my idea is that once students leave the traditional learning setting, that they are still learning. As we know, people are constantly learning, especially children. So once they leave the traditional classroom setting, they are surrounded by a safe space where they can also learn and also have fun. So yeah, basically, yeah, that's the gist. Thank you.
We have 1 minute.
Good afternoon, everyone. So in researching about this project, something I come across was a story that I had found in an interview of someone that had actually lived in the neighborhood while they were growing up. And something that they vividly remembered was that they didn't really have a choice to leave, and that the community that used to be there was very vibrant and full of retail. And something I really enjoyed about that was that they described it as a Norman Rockwell painting, which is a famous painter that actually focused on community-oriented paintings and the normal ongoings of life. And so in this proposal, what I kind of wanted to do was make a giant dedicated like park, something that the community could really walk through and enjoy, and it would use the deprivations in the highway and also fill it in some places so that it could create a hill-like experience for the community members. Another thing that I wanted to add to this was create a community greenhouse or even a couple community greenhouses where people could go in and buy food and make food for themselves as the community. And in doing so, also permit students and stuff to learn how to do it themselves and really have an appreciation for healthy foods. And also create like farmers markets and whatnot in the area so that the community could actually go there and buy food on a weekly basis over the summer and really kind of have these different things that could bring the community together. So, thank you.
Stuck. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Austin Tucker. My vision for the Highway to Nowhere first begins with understanding the site as a space to be inhabited volumetrically, and one that is connective of the existing neighborhoods while also providing a new and valuable connection to the site below. So my idea for doing this is to kind of incorporate infrastructure and architecture as one, something that can be traversed and inhabited all at the same time and is valuable in moving people between these spaces. Another idea that I have for the development is in this catastrophic scenario in which we've been given to start with, using pieces of the broken city fabric to rebuild our new vision in the Highway to Nowhere, which is why you can see little pieces of Baltimore relics being replicated and used in this collage. So that's my vision. Thank you.
Inspiring to see student work. So thank you. I know it's kind of nerve wracking to stand up in front of a group. You all were great. Jack? Jack Sullivan is a professor of landscape architecture from the University of Maryland.
Thank you. An outlier in the landscape architecture world here. Thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure to conduct this studio, which I've done for the last 2.5 years. And so since January of 2020, I've used the Urban Design Studio to introduce landscape architecture students to the complex issues of city planning, past and present, and the value of biocentric urban design. Baltimore's Highway to Nowhere is an excellent lesson in what not to do. Its potential transformation into a 55-acre park is an opportunity for students to tackle challenging planning and design questions from scale and form to environmental justice and health equity. The course requires that students read a significant amount of literature to learn the root causes of some of the city's most misguided planning decisions. The narrative of segregation, racial bias, white flight, and property devaluation, which is well documented in books, scholarly articles, and news reports, sets the stage for the art of turning the discriminatory practices and injustices into the past into restitution for the benefit of future generations. Historic maps record the physical changes from forest to farm to the figure ground of urban form. Once a bustling center of Black entrepreneurship and entertainment, the near West Side neighborhood supported a lot of Black families, many of which had migrated from the South to take well-paying jobs in processing and manufacturing plants starting in the 1920s, but especially after World War II. At the height of Baltimore's economic growth in the 1950s and early 60s, it, like many cities across the country, was anxious to follow Robert Moses' lead, interjecting high-speed limited access highways into urban communities that were unaware of the consequences to social connection and economic stability. The depressed freeway caused a deep physical and social breach that few had hopes of closing until a plan for the light rail transit opened the possibility of transit-oriented development, becoming a catalyst for change. If realized, new transit stations would initiate business growth and spur financial interest in improving housing and community services. Baltimore was cautiously optimistic until the plan was squelched at the state level in 2015. Now nearing the end of the current governor's tenure with the promise of new green infrastructure programs on the horizon, Baltimore is once again rising with its hopes. The speculation that 55 acres of parkland could be combined with 14.5-mile transit system is irresistible to both academics and practitioners in the planning and design arts. The Urban Land Institute conducted a technical assistance panel, TAP, study of the Highway to Nowhere. It offered a plan that emphasized building development equally balanced with landscape parks. I was not impressed with the idea that new buildings would be the solution. This TAP report inspired me to look into the potential of a transformation that focused on the landscape as a means of making the community connections, improving the health and well-being of local residents, and inspiring skill training programs and economic development that employed nature as the basis for the community's prosperity. Students in the urban design studios, both undergraduate fall semester and graduate students spring semester, have investigated the values and pitfalls of large parks and explored a variety of ways to bring healthy, economically viable, entertaining, and educational spaces and programs to existing and future residents. The resulting proposals included master plan strategies, park character studies, and how streets can be defined for multiple modes of transportation with walking as a priority use. Students were attracted to the potential of historic structures being rehabilitated for economic development. They also saw recreation, exercise, and sports activities in a car-free environment as major contributions to community health. Okay. Students were also encouraged to include civic buildings such as libraries, museums, community centers, greenhouses, and market structures. The many visions of a future without this freeway make this studio project worthwhile venture for everyone involved, including students, design critics, public officials, the instructor, and mostly importantly, the community. Just some examples. There's actually a lot of examples out in the lobby that you might want to take a look at. So I invite you to take a longer look at some of the projects that students have done. Don't hesitate to ask me about the students' intentions or request some explanations. I'm happy to speak with you, and I'd love to hear what you think about it all. Thank you very much.
You. Let's see. Can you all hear me through the PA or no? So the microphone has given out, but we have my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Samuel Jordan. Do you want to, are you presenting from your computer?
Well, you tell me how best that will work.
Yeah, if you want to set your computer here, that might be a little bit better. That's perfect.
So you have the slide. Well, I
Yeah,
have-
they're up right here. Yeah, it's already in there for you, sir.
Great.
Okay.
So let me make sure I'm scrolling it properly. Friends, there is a time when bright lights and haze aren't even deflected by great sunglasses. So I'm going to wear these while I'm speaking, but the stereo effect on the screen means that that won't work. Good evening. I'm Samuel Jordan. I'm president of Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. Hope you've heard of us. We're the people who've been standing since within hours, 2 hours of Hogan's cancellation of the Red Line Light Rail project to make sure that we reverse the impact of what structural racism can do to public transportation. And in the course of it, that is between 2005, 2006, and 2015, I spent about 9 years of my life as a volunteer planner, outreach type person on the Red Line Light Rail project. And you've heard 2002 to 2015, 13 years. And what we have is that, can you hear me? Does that signal means you can't hear me? Okay, good enough. I'll project a little more. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
This will be better. This will be just fine. In fact, what I want to do is simply not take 7 minutes for my presentation, but I want to offer a kind of a jazzed improvisation. That is, we're going to talk about Highway to Nowhere to Reconnecting Communities. And in that course, that period of time, we also saw, and this is what was inspiring me, that maybe we're making the transition between the autocentric culture and a rail future, not only for the region, but for the country. You know, the United States was headed toward a rail future back in as late as the 50s, 60s. And then we got the autocentric culture that sort of wasted Baltimore, white flight, high rates of movement of jobs outside the city and so on. Well, those are things that we have to certainly discuss and include in our discussion about development. In fact, a slogan from the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition is, we must always merge transit policy with land development policy. But you've got to get there. And the way we get there, having spent those 9 years on the Red Line project, became most important to me, what is the level of engagement of the communities along the corridor? And for that, when Klaus said, I'll talk about the SACs for a moment or two, I want to sort of share that with a few real survivors, veterans of the SAC project. I want to give just a couple minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, to folks who are survivors, planners on the Harlem Park SAC program and on the West Baltimore MARC program. So let me begin with a few words from Arlene Fisher, the Honorable Arlene Fisher. Oh, very good. Thank you. We'll bring it to you, Arlene. I take her so seriously.
This is working now. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fisher.
Understanding the road to nowhere, when people just say it and they just throw it off as the road to nowhere. But there's a history and a culture about using and about that building being there. Our grandparents were living in the houses in this area between Mulberry and Franklin Street. The city asked them to plan to use that area for something in the community. Most of the people that lived there had no concept that the city at the end would come up and take all of their houses. So when we talk about getting people involved, one of the first things we had to deal with was people's interpretation of, are you going to take my house? We spent the majority of the initial part of it trying to convince people that you weren't going to take their houses. We had people not only from Franklin and Mulberry area, we had people from Walbrook coming down to the meeting asking us, are you going to take my houses? Because they did not understand. All they understood was their relatives were living in those houses. The city came by and swept all of them away, sent them away, told them eventually when we rebuild the houses, you can come back. Well, that did not happen. Whatever we do with the road to nowhere, the history of the road to nowhere, you wouldn't even have the MARC station if it wasn't for the people that met with it, the Red Line and the road to nowhere, because part of their development was for them to upgrade the MARC station. Because when we grew up, the MARC station was just a bunch of steps. So if you were handicapped and you wanted to work in Washington, you had to go all the way over to Charles Street to catch the train. So one of it was to elevate the MARC station on and make it handicap accessible, also make it amenable for people to come and get jobs, which would also bring people from Washington who didn't want to spend $3,000 a month on a 1-bedroom apartment over to Baltimore to begin to purchase the houses in our neighborhood. So because you could get a whole house. I spent most of my time taking people on tours who were saying, you have a basement? What is a basement? And I'm looking at the, it's down underground, a basement. Yeah, we would take them down to show them. A lot of people, I guess in Washington, y'all don't have basements, or whoever did. But it showed the history, what we're trying to do, because most of our neighborhoods had an enormous amount of vacants, because when the road to nowhere came in and a lot of people left, their cousins and aunts left, they also left too. And if you look up Mulberry Street and you look down Franklin, that's where a majority of your vacants were. When we were children, you would just walk up and down and through there, hi aunt, such and such, hey, grandma, what did you say? Whatever. When they came in and created the road to nowhere and set it up, it set up a different system. So one of the things we were trying to do was encourage people to come back, and we still are encouraging people to come back. We have affordable housing in our neighborhoods, and we got 3 or 4 different places. So anybody looking for housing, I can help you find it. 3-story houses with basements and yards. So as we begin to develop, it needs to be something to get the interest in. And as we talk about this, and Samuel knows when we started talking about this, my whole thing is trying to convince people that you're not going to come back and take their houses. Because the people in Poppleton, the people in Harlem Park, we get calls. I got calls on my phone. Ms. Fisher, you want to sell your house? Whatever. I'm sitting up here saying all the vacant houses in West Baltimore. Why are you calling me? But this is happening. And this is what's happening. People are calling us to find out, is the city coming by to take all our houses? I said, no. Then why are they calling us to take our houses? So you have to understand the history of it. You have to understand the concern and the fear that a lot of people have in even developing something new. Because as you develop something new, they assume you're going to take what they have to build whatever new you're talking about. So that's part of the problem. And we wish you help. And we got houses in the neighborhood. Let me know if you want to.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arlene. What we'll have just a few minutes again, Scott Cashnow. Scott was also active on the Highland Park, Poppleton, on West Baltimore, Mark Station SAC, but he's going to talk a little more about the process and the production of the SAC boards.
Sure, hi, I'm Scott Cashnow. I served on the Harlem Park SAC with Arlene. And I brought the vision plan and we're who facilitated, thank you, facilitated the SAC, and I thought did a fantastic job, thank you. And it probably produced this document that I'm holding. It's dated 2011. The auto is your comment. I got 2 boys, my oldest is 11. This is exactly the same as it was when he was born, and truly, probably, depending on what we build, he may be grown and gone before anything gets done. In Poppleton, the rec center has been closed for 20 years. In Carroll Park, the rec center has been closed for 20 years. You know, and get it back open. So the effort with the SAC, I found it actually extraordinary. This is Sam asked me to talk about, Samuel. I don't know if you've ever gone out to dinner with 10 people and try to decide where you're gonna go, but it's hard to do. What Arlene started long before I ever did with Baltimore and organizing around the Red Line and that effort, got thousands of people to agree on a concept and actually something that could have been built. And not getting into politics, I think it was a terrible decision to stop it. I also think it would be a really terrible decision to not try to continue to fight for it, because where I live in West Baltimore, I don't think that there's anything that's going to stitch the neighborhoods back together, bring the economic development to the neighborhoods that doesn't include transportation being able to get to jobs. And that, I think, that's critical. It's one of the reasons I'm so thankful for Samuel and for Glenn, what they've been doing over the last 10 years probably, to continue to fight for this to actually happen. So as you consider concepts, I think that's really important. And the second thing that's absolutely critical is the engagement with the community and real engagement, where they're actually involved in the process, being a part of it. The SAC was a fine example of how that worked. It's actually where I met Arlene, and so you know, like I live in Franklin Square, she lives in Harlem Park. There was a 1-block area where there's nothing between our neighborhoods, as you all know. And there wasn't a lot of reason for us to cross into each other's neighborhoods. But the planning effort of the SAC actually brought us together, and now we know each other well. And the same thing has happened through other planning processes. But the final critical thing that actually has to happen is that it actually has to get built. We can't just have planning just for the sake of planning. We have to actually build something, even if it's not perfect. We can't let perfection be the enemy of good enough. We're good and let's get it done. So happy to be a part of whatever goes forward from here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And again, I think that the course of our meeting and discussions today Actually, there's a sort of evolution. But the evolution I want to emphasize is, again, the role that communities along the Highway to Nowhere corridor play in a future for Baltimore. What we're saying in Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition is very simple, that if we can get a grip on race-based transit policy, we'd finally have the kind of future that Baltimore deserves for the future, generational. What we have learned is that as long as we don't address the issues of a divisive and race-based and race-divided transit system, Baltimore will never have a modern transportation system. In fact, I'll just mention this and move on because our focus is on this evolution here from the Highway to Nowhere through to the Reconnecting Communities. But I want to just make this clear. White supremacy has only 3 gifts. It's important that we emphasize it. One obviously is, and you're seeing it worked out in their daily lives, the threat of violence. Violence, the threat of violence are the first two. The first is violence. The second is a threat of violence. But the third is underdevelopment for everybody. And that's what we've experienced in the last 8 years of the Hogan administration. Anyone here can raise your hand and tell me what you think is the signature economic development program for Larry Hogan? What is his signature economic development program that lifted all boats? You're absolutely right. There is none. Okay, there is none. So how is it that we're having his Department of Transportation, MDOT-MTA, make a 50-year plan when we see what they've done for the last 8 years? Okay, let's talk about why that's part of our discussion about the movement of the Reconnecting Communities Project and this idea of what now happens along the Highway to Nowhere corridor. My inspiration comes from a group called, that you may not have heard of. I want to introduce you to it. The Emergency Committee on the Transportation Crisis. Washington, D.C. was about to face a fate like Baltimore. In the late 50s, when the Interstate Highway Program was developed through the Eisenhower administration, it was clear that someone in the real estate industry, in the automobile industry, got together and said, we can make a ton of money using these highways to split up communities, drive up real estate prices, get folks to leave the city. And what we end up doing is making it impossible for us to realize the dreams of an urban society. This is where we were headed. This is where we need to go because sprawl isn't working. So bringing it to what we're doing today is the Highway to Nowhere corridor has folks like Minister Glenn Smith, he's here. He's a survivor and a former resident of the communities that were destroyed along the Highway to Nowhere. And for so long, people thought that the Red Line project itself was an effort at reparations for the damage done in that part of West Baltimore by the Highway to Nowhere. Well, it isn't really, because we're still every day having to rebuild a constituency that wants to see it built. So we put it this way. The engagement of the communities along the corridor is the most critical engagement for success of either project. Completing the Red Line, as well as making this Reconnecting Communities Pilot Program worthwhile and productive. So I think with a few minutes, Ren, what I want to make sure is clear is that as a group in West Baltimore, we call ourselves the Reconnecting Communities in West Baltimore Coalition. There are a few members here, Denise Johnson, Arlene, Minister Glenn Smith, Scott Cashnow, others here. What we're saying is that those communities need to be at the very heart of planning anything for the Highway to Nowhere. We're getting a lot of folks involved in the planning process at various levels of state government, and I know what's best for you communities who are not quite seeing that When the communities themselves are engaged in that process, we get the boost transit equity requires, we get the boost of stabilization for families and individuals, communities along the corridor require, and we get the $3 to $6.5 billion that accompanies light rail construction. So the SACs were an effort to get communities at each of the station areas to plan what the future should look like. And I think that we want to scroll this to the next.
We're
Yeah.
almost out of time. We've got 2
Okay.
minutes left.
I'll use my 2 minutes to say that that combination of community members and leaders engaged in the design of the station areas is the best promise. In fact, is a promise that we will have a system that works in the interest of the folks who live along that corridor. Our dream is that anyone living within 15 minutes walk of a station area, of a station hub, should have the experience of a walkable, livable, breathable, workable Baltimore, almost like a village. Well, that's still possible, but we need to make people believe that we can develop the village. We need to have folks along the corridor and in other areas of the city's leadership, understanding that we can't make a move without a reliable, multimodal, equitable transportation system anchored by light rail. I would end my only remarks with this, that we want to work with the architect, with AIA. We want to work with the Office of Planning, the Department of Transportation, and develop an exhibit for at least 3 or 4 of the boards that were developed by the SACs to let folks know who don't quite know and didn't follow that history and may not have been engaged, that real folks, neighbors who might live across the street from you, live next door from you, were actually engaged in making and developing fairly, in fact, very sophisticated projections of what their communities would look like. The community around each station hub would have its own distinct identity. Communities have identities. And those identities would give Baltimore the kind of multifaceted course of travel through its heart. We would see a lot more Baltimore, we'd have a lot more interaction, and it would build the economy, as we have said, but also open up opportunities for those who live along the corridor. So 2 advisories. 1, our group, Reconnecting Communities, West Baltimore Coalition, insist on being co-applicants with the city and the Department of Transportation in developing that plan. Now, they want to know from us, what does co-applicant mean? We'll talk about it in detail, but it also means we want to be at the table and not leaving the table. Okay, not just to be a station area or a RCP community advisory group. We know what happens with community advisory groups. The advice they give doesn't benefit the community in the long run because it's not implemented in the community. So you get the community advisory group making great discussions, but not having the clout that they need. So we want to make sure that we are co-applicants, and we want to make sure that the money that's dedicated to the Reconnecting Communities project goes to communities along the corridor, particularly in West Baltimore. The project was inspired in Senator Van Hollen by the experience of the Highway to Nowhere. What's wrong with us wanting to keep the money in the communities where they were in fact originally and initially directed? So we're going to fight for it. You're going to hear about it, but that's what we need to do to make sure that you are supportive as well of those communities along the corridor being at the table as co-applicants with meaningful participation in decision-making. Thanks so much, Ryan. You've been very, okay.
And next we have the great pleasure of Miss Denise Johnson, who is the cultural organizer. And Miss Denise is going to talk to us about her work in West Baltimore. And thank you.
Good evening, Denise Johnson. I'm a cultural organizer. So what is a cultural organizer? So what happened back in 2007, I've always done traditional organizing, which is fighting against something. Housing, crime, sanitation, homelessness, infant mortality. I'm organizing around all those deficits. So I met a visual artist, and the visual artist came into West Baltimore with his thesis paper from Micah, talking about the highway to nowhere. Beautiful thesis paper, I never read it, but when he walked into West Baltimore talking about the highway to nowhere and what wasn't there, he had I'm trying to be nice with my words, but I'm an organizer, so I get a little provocative because I'm supposed to agitate as an organizer. That's the role. So he walked into West Baltimore talking about what we don't have. I'm a native of West Baltimore. My father was displaced from the highway to nowhere. So I said, well, you have to talk with the people. I said, the values and the culture of West Baltimore is about the people. Not that we don't have galleries and not that we don't have restaurants, but we have people and we have a place. And I can tell you about the place because I'm from this place. So between organizing and him being a visual artist, and one of the things that he challenged about graduating from Micah's program as a community artist was that he didn't understand their program talking about community arts when community was never present about community. So we agitated one another and we came up with the concept for Baltimore and West Baltimore cultural organizing, which is about place, it's about values, it's about connections, it's about using arts as the backdrop, reflecting us back to us. And artists are just a part of the community, just like everybody else. So what did we find out? We found out that people in West Baltimore create all kinds of wonderful things. All kinds of wonderful things. We used the community center, Support, is called, what is it called there? Community Works. We set that space up as an exhibit space because we had photographers. We had people that made chairs. We had people that sewed. We had people that painted. We had people that did all kinds of things. And the artists believe, or still do, just about everybody has some creativity and art in them. So another thing that occurred during that period was that West Baltimore had never told its own story about the highway to nowhere. Everybody knew Barbara McCausland's story, right? Everybody knew that she stopped on her end, but in West Baltimore, word on the street is that we didn't do anything. But we found out that that wasn't true either. So there's the story. And the beginning of the story is that power, government, and racism decided to run highways through Black communities, calling them slugs. That's what's in the literature, right? That's one story. The second story is government moving forward and deciding to use the money however they wanted to use it in Baltimore and other places. That's the second story. Culturally, we talk about the third story that gets created, which is happening here today, and is what is happening with the Reconnecting grant based on my interpretation there as an organizer. And that's the story in the middle. And the story in the middle is supposed to be the new story. It's supposed to be the learning from the beginning story, the second story, how it got implemented, and what we learned. So the third story in the middle becomes so important to do something different. There's no way in the world we can utilize this Reconnecting grant for West Baltimore with government leading. Can't do it. It's been done already. It's an old story. We have to do something different. I started off by saying cultural organizing is a result of putting art and organizing together. And the two of us work together, we're still friends. For 10 or more years, I've learned so much from him. He's learned so much from me, added to my language, added to my toolbox, vice versa for him. So that's the challenge I'm putting out today, is that we have to do something different. Government cannot completely lead this effort, and expect the community to just show up at the table. Example is the long 50-year history of West Baltimore born through charrettes. We need something different. But anyway, as a result of working with the visual artists, they engaged the community around their story, how they wanted to tell their story. It included singers that are probably gone now. It included some that were not singers. And it was very sad because I had to listen to people cry. It was really heartfelt that after all those years, people were still sad. Most of the literature talks about houses. Schools were torn down, churches were torn down, businesses were torn down, not just houses. And when we talk about houses, we talk about families, because we know people lived together. It was not single houses, these were family houses. So families were displaced. So folks told their stories, and out of their stories, we helped them to identify the values of their story, the values of their place. That's what we call culture. We call culture, it's all about us, it's about the people. And out of that, the people in West Baltimore came up with an expression called remembrance, healing, and celebration. So we had many, many story circles, which was the remembrance. The healing was visual artists and other artists reflecting those feelings back. So we did a lot of temporary art in the community. And then we did a celebration. We were able to connect with another organization outside of Baltimore called Ultimate Roots. They are I don't know, maybe 60 years art activist organization for the Southern region. They liked the work that we were doing, shared the same values, and they wanted to celebrate their anniversary in West Baltimore, which became Roots Fest 2011. We had an onslaught of artists from around the country come into West Baltimore, created a lot of temporary art with the community, and I just want to throw this out real quick. People in West Baltimore know West Baltimore, whether they divided by the highway nowhere or not. So it's not just bounded by the neighborhood. Folks know one another. That's why we claim West Baltimore. That is the reason why, because we know one another. It is our connection and it is our place. Is it my time up? Okay.
As always, a pleasure to watch you present. Okay, so continuing on, oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't get to the last slide, but Ms. Denise has a board and Mr. Jordan has 3 boards that talk about the work that he's doing too. So we'll mingle after this and you can talk to them in person. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't get to any of your slides. And then next we have Mr. Brad Rogers talking about the ULI Technical Assistance Panel.
Someday I'm going to pay you back for asking me to follow her.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But I will do my best. Hi, I'm Brad Rogers. I'm the Executive Director of the South Baltimore Gateway Partnership. A couple of years ago, back in 2018, I was asked to chair a panel of people looking at the Highway to Nowhere and Martin Luther King as a system. And that's what I just want to bring to the conversation, thinking not just about the one element, but both elements together. For very good and justifiable reasons, people talk about the Highway to Nowhere as a scar. What's important to remember is that in addition to the scar, we also have the moat, right? Both were designed together, one to carve through West Baltimore, the other to wrap around downtown with the goal of creating a barrier between the shining glassy buildings of downtown and the residents of the city in which they were located. And those two together form a dysfunctional system. They are both profound failures that really serve no constituency well. Neither of them are a high-speed, well-connected highway that will get commuters in and out of town. Neither of them are neighborhood streets that serve the needs of people who live nearby. Neither of them are high quality pedestrian environments where you can shop at local stores. Neither of them are leafy, beautiful boulevards. They serve nobody well. What they are barriers that generate more barriers. And I want to talk about how that ripple effect of barriers creating barriers expands, and we just learn to live with it. Here we have the neighborhood of Heritage Crossing. Beautiful neighborhood with beautiful homes, beautiful people. Some of them may be here tonight. And the folks in Heritage Crossing are no dummies. They got their beautiful homes. They do not want to be looking out their bedroom windows or their dining room windows at a traffic gutter. And so what did they build? They built a berm, right? A big dirt wall to protect them because they need to pull back, to retrench, to back away from the discomfort of what was happening along that corridor. But as more and more people back away and more people pull back, you end up in a situation where really the only people using that space, other than the cars that are flying by and they're there for just a couple seconds, are people who either don't have any choice about where to go, or people that are trying to do things that they can't do in places with lots of attention and eyes on them. And you end up generating a situation where in order to protect their berm from people using it for purposes that they didn't want, they had to build a fence. They needed a barrier to protect the barrier from the barrier. And these things ripple. And I want to come back to this issue of the homeless, not in any way to be pejorative against people who are in a difficult financial situation. It could happen to anybody at any point. But there's a reason why the intersection of the highway to nowhere and MLK is a long-standing, decades-long site where the homeless gather. And it's not just because there's an overhang, because there are lots of overhangs. And it's not just because there's a lot of traffic, so if you wanted to ask for money, you could, because there are lots of places where there's lots of traffic. This is also a place where people have, I'll stand here first. This is also a place where people are all pulling back from. And as everybody pulls back, the only people who can take advantage of it are the people who have no choice, who can't pull back to somewhere because they have nowhere to pull back to. And then we get annoyed that it has attracted so many homeless people. And so what do? We put up another barrier. And we create a fence around and we say, no one's allowed to use this space. We have created a space that is literally for no one. If you try to use it, the police will get you, right? So that's what happened. We create something that works for nobody and we get a space that works for nobody until that becomes the norm and we learn to live with it. But we have a lot of assets to work with. So I want to just talk very briefly about the opportunity at this intersection to create a node, a place, a space of value and opportunity, taking advantage of the nothing and reimagining it. And thinking about what you could do to fill in that intersection to do something new. And I'm going to give just an example. This is not the plan. I'm not in a position to say what the plan is, but I am in a position to tell you what you could fit in that space. And you can fit a lot of things. You can have enough space for a grocery store and more retail, which I know people need. You could have space for ball fields, which I know people need. You could reconnect Fulton, which I know people want. And this, Fremont, sorry, Fremont, and there's even room for additional parks. And then when you take down those, as Kyle pointed out, when you take down those highways, those ramps, you get yourself more space to do more creative development. And because that space is currently controlled by the city of Baltimore, we would have the ability to dictate a lot about what could happen in that space and drive the kind of development that we think meets our agenda for social justice and equity and economic development. So that's the presentation that I have. And
I'm now happy to hand it back.
Alicia Lorber is the Chief of Capital Planning for DOT, Baltimore City Department of Transportation, and we're delighted to have her give a presentation on the Reconnecting Communities grant process.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so grateful for getting a chance to listen to a lot of background and history. There's a lot of different interests. There's a lot of different ideas. There's a lot of stories, and I know that there's so much more that we barely even scratched the surface tonight. And it's really exciting. So thank you for having me. I am leading the effort to put the grant application together for what will be hopefully a redevelopment or just a whole new investment in the area that is the highway to nowhere. I'm calling it a strategic grant pursuit. I am a designer, I'm a landscape architect, but I'm not going to talk so much about design. We saw a lot of really cool design ideas, and there's still, we don't know exactly what the design is going to be yet. But what I'm going to talk about tonight is a little bit more about policy and procedure and like unraveling some of the fabric that have put us in the position that we are today, pulling at those strings so that we can have something new, get rid of the fabric that has put us in the situation that we're in, and have something new and do it different. We're at a time, it's a really exciting and unique time because I feel like the stars are aligning in a way that they never have before. And I'm really excited because I feel like this is our chance and we have to jump on it. So this is a brand new federal grant program called Reconnecting Communities. And I don't want to go into all of the details. There's pages and pages if you can read about it online. But the heart of the program is like nothing that has ever been available before. And it's basically, it's a new federal grant, a transportation grant that is not so much about transportation. It's about mitigating the impacts of past transportation projects. So it is about being able to facilitate better mobility and accessibility, but it also is about housing opportunities, safety, economic competitiveness, sustainability, technological innovation. All of these things are what they're looking for in this grant, and it's not just transportation. And what we've been hearing about today is that, yeah, it's about 600 acres of highway, but it does not have to be highway. It can be so much more than a highway to nowhere. So when we think about this grant application and this new program, does anyone have an idea of a good candidate project? So the story goes is that Senator Van Hollen, who is our Maryland senator, was one of the authors of the program for this project. We have some pressure to win this grant because I'm told it was written for us. So fingers crossed we're going to win it. We just have to make sure that we have a really good application, and that's part of why we're having these conversations. And we're gonna do something about it. So you've heard a lot about plans from the past, and there's even older plans, and there's a lot that has been happening, and planning is kind of evolutionary. Planning never really stops. Planning is something that, once you reach certain goals, then you have to keep planning for whatever the new goals are. So there has been a lot of planning, but unfortunately, there hasn't been as much result from some of those planning activities. But what we're doing is, it's evolutionary process, and we're building off of that. We're building off a really strong planning foundation. And there are goals that people have been talking about and asking for time and time again, as we've done a lot of these planning studies in the past. And you've heard a lot of them already. And so this is what we need to be integrating in this project. And that's what makes this project different from previous transportation planning studies is that it's more than transportation. So our schedule, we're putting together the grant application. It is due October 13th. We're at a point where we're talking to everyone we can as we're putting together the strategy. And what we're looking at is having a planning study that is really about constructability and putting together an action plan and is multifaceted in a lot of ways. And it's really doing more of a technical deep dive than what some of the previous planning studies have done, so that we can really make sure that what we're doing is something that is financeable, constructible, is something that the market can support, and most of all, something that the community can support. So that's all part of what's going to make this feasible. And in the end of this planning study, we want to have a very specific action plan identifying how things are going to be funded, who is going to be responsible to do them, when they need to get done, and hold ourselves and everyone accountable to keep it moving. Public engagement is a really important part of that. I welcome the partnership, and I want to learn more about ways that we can engage with some of these really exciting community building and community storytelling processes. We want to do a very multifaceted public engagement strategy, partnering with our community members, and reaching as many people as possible and in many ways as possible. And so with that, we're really excited about this opportunity. And are we doing questions?
So we're a little over. I think we had some great surprise presenters, and we're just like 10 minutes over schedule. So I'm thinking if we do 15 minutes of Q&A, then we'll have 15 minutes to mingle and look at boards and talk to each other more one-on-one. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, great. So Q&A. I think Q&A. So I think Q&A is going to be for all of the panelists. So yeah, if someone has a question, I'll bring the mic to you. We'll give you a minute to answer your question, and then we'll bring it back to whoever your question is for. So does anybody? Yeah.
Great presentation. I'll start with the question. Last presenter was backward and in the application, how many stakeholders?
So we have one application, and what we're doing is the city of Baltimore is the applicant, and then we will have partnerships. And we're still, you know, we're having continual conversations, I should say, to work out how these goals will be defined and established. We're looking at having a stakeholder advisory committee that is going to be really instrumental driving the decision-making process, and with representation from the community.
So my question from a person who is just moved to Baltimore, and when I was moving here, I heard a lot of things saying about why should you move there, that's who you do, things like that. And now that I live here, you know, I find out that, okay, talking to people who are from here, there are certain areas that you should go to or whatever you want to say. I really don't really believe that until I actually interact with those areas. But knowing that West Baltimore, one of the areas that a lot of people talk about, are there any initiatives or things that we're trying to do to change that culture of people saying that that area is unsafe, and that people not going to go? And that's where anyone.
So what's happening, political moment is absolutely an issue. The focus on West Baltimore projects right now is just under. We've had Senate Days legislation and President Authority, which is the focus of rebuilding West Baltimore have, the, person that is running for governor, Russ Moore. That's the food center for families and folks. And go while he was at the Robin Foundation. And then you have the city department of housing and community development in West Baltimore, impact. And then you have citizens that have a project called We That in West Baltimore Culture and Economics. So, and all of that is focused right at the intersection of Pennsylvania and York, which is perfect intersection because it has 5,000 folks of color, people traveling on a daily basis. And it represents represent West Baltimore cultural district, equal cultural artistic intersection.
That's a great summary. I love that you know all of the programs that are going on.
One thing about your comment that was brought up, because I hear a lot also, is that one of the primary reasons why people move to certain areas or go to certain areas. Safety. That's like the second issue I hear about Baltimore, besides education. But the reality is it's not actually safety that they're talking about, it's more the perception of safety. Because it's how it feels. Not really, no one's checking the data. When you walk down the street, nobody knows whether someone was robbed there or something happened or was killed. Any of that going on. That's not at all what they're talking about. It's not what it feels like. I think this is a good place to share that thought with all. Is that they're talking about vacant houses, you know, pile of glass on the ground they have to walk through, or trash, or missing crosswalks, lack of lighting, all of those things. And that's not safety, it's investment. It's really lack of investment that you got. So I just wanted to share that briefly on your comment. Thanks.
Say one thing. When we were planning the festival, believe it or not, this is why this point to me as a native Baltimorean that love this town. When we were planning the festival, we were given advice not to do this in West Baltimore because a lot of crime was going to happen. And it caused me to have to face the reality of how people really felt about West Baltimore. As a matter of fact, it was a 5-day learning exchange in a week festival. And during that time, no crime happened without extra money for extra money. All those kind of things because of perception. So that's the important side. It's been really this lesson.
Yes, I'd like to answer that commentary on this question of West Baltimore, how people might not go to areas of the city. I mean, now, so there's a group that says that in order for the transit system to be better, we need to attract choice right. Yes, we will. For most of our white people who use the system. Why are we so concerned about making sure that we attract them? Here's what I mean. In order for public transit to attract more riders, we have to make sure that the experience is improved. The experience of people who already word of mouth will get the new riders, choice riders. That isn't work. We talk about West Baltimore. One reason I'm glad to be associated with folks like Fisher, because when the residents of the area are directly involved with improving circumstances, the conditions, the atmosphere, the environment, then you get more people wondering like, so we want residents, advocates for West Baltimore, who live in West Baltimore, to be engaged with the street community. It is a project then can do just that. Have the residents of the area engaged, improving it, walkable, people, yes. So that's what's going to change West Baltimore's reputation. The work of residents who live there are assisting that we have resources, not just scattered everywhere, all over the city, particularly with the typical developers. We have a lot more money, but regular folk living in your neighborhood to engage some for a year and a half, 2 years. The same rules. That's what will be, that's what we're doing. We're doing more reputation on.
Did you have an answer?
Right.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is John Mara. I'm from West Baltimore. I'm one of the organizations that were planting the trees. The center of what you're talking about. We talked a lot about how it's 11 years to get here in this meeting. So, and in another 11 years from now, a lot of the trees are already established and further established, even larger trees. So I want to know if there are plans to either protect the trees that do remain established along that century again, or to replace and replant trees of the same caliber by the time the project is fruition.
Thanks. I'm a landscape architect and I love trees. Sometimes we do need to cut trees down. I cannot say what is going to happen, how much or how little of the trees that were planted in that strip will remain. What I can say is that our policy is that we do replace trees, and in a lot of cases, in particularly sensitive areas, we replace trees that we call caliber. So if we have a tree that's 36 inches diameter trunk, so if we have a big tree that's 36 inches, then we will plant 18 2-inch trees. And we might not be able to put 18 2-inch trees. Again, that's the width of the trunk now. We might not do that many trees right in the same location, so we'll be looking at adding that additional tree canopy elsewhere. This is how we do a lot of our projects. This wouldn't be a new thing for this particular project. This is oftentimes something that a standard that we hold ourselves to.
I just hope that people will look at this in a much larger future, bigger picture. I mean, for replacing trees in kind is ridiculous because what we really need are millions of trees here. I mean, this is a city that is desperate for cooling, for shade, for water control. You know, this is the city is in dire need of transforming its image as a city that can be the greenest city in all of the East Coast.
So what is the DOT's position on the wetland discussion? Is that part of the application, or silent on it, or recognize it?
So the red line decision is very much a political decision that was made by the state. It was a decision that the state did not agree with. And the state is responsible for our transit system. So our position is that we support what is called the East-West Corridor Plan, which was something that came out of a recent planning study done by the MTA. And it's looking at basically looking at what a future east-west transit corridor could be through this particular site area. I think everyone might consider this a future red line, but with our current political situation, I will say that the MTA has been a good partner, and they are also to our match and improving
and who knows the next governor might support that line.
But there's a follow-up question. Yeah, this, right, not so much because this, my comment will engage us in a couple of hours debate and interaction, but there are differences of opinion about this east-west corridor. In fact, our first glance at it is, if it's such a great project, why are they not interacting directly with public transportation? We put language in the infrastructure bill for money that would be directed for Maryland. When the state makes up its mind and commits to the project, the east-west corridor project is not mentioned. They talk about an optionless light rail, okay? That's called counterfeit. You know, how someone tells you that $300 Louis Vuitton set for you for $40, and you can still throw plastic. Okay, friends, look, like a Picasso, like a great statue or something, is not the same thing.
So you say, is it bus or what?
We're saying if it's authentic, it isn't trying to start from scratch, start from another alignment. We have an alignment. We have an alignment that was approved, fully funded, and shovel ready after 13 years. Why are we now looking for another alignment, east-west alignment? I can tell you that there's something comical from time to time. I'll just give you an example. Essex to Sullivan City, that's us. Anybody in the right curve, there, right line, will schedule a commute from Essex to Sullivan City? No. That's how we know that not all of these formulations are valid and can be independently verified. Anyone who's going to take a commute or take a ride, a 2+ hour bus ride from Essex to Sullivan City, is someone who's planning to move his, her, or their entire family, public and private belongings on the bus to Ellicott City at points further, and they're not coming back. They're not coming back. All right. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is we've got to be able to verify the assumptions being made by this east-west project. We see that their calculations and metrics are independently verified. They don't give them to us. How can we prove that? The red line, on the other hand, is certifiable. We reevaluate the red line final environmental impact statement and get it approved as a record decision. And we can now spend the money that has been set out by the federal government to get started with the project. Okay. Authenticity, certification, and connection with the community that would be most directly affected. That's the secret.
I just want to make sure we get one last question. And then we'll break and have chat. School recommendation. For this. Are you asking? Okay, great.
Yeah, I can hear all of them.
I was asking what's the best way to build trust and what I'm going to one about and
and how do you do that best as a student who's working on projects that this neighborhood? So how do a student build trust with community?
So my training was in counseling. I'm trained counselor, but I had a mentor that taught me organizing. I was constant. So I was actually real quick, I'm gonna just destroy the right piece of your problem directions. I'm sorry. But anyway, so I say it to say that if you want trust, you got to earn trust. Tell me something about you. Don't come to me wanting to know anything that's very intrusive, is a stranger. Why should I tell you anything about it? You tell me something about you, and then maybe I would want to tell you something about me. So culture as a tool, we use some story circles to be able to build trust, build fellowship, build community. And that vulnerability happens through a series of story circles that allow people to just be human, check in and be human, take all power off the table, doesn't matter the position, where you live, how much money you make, or who you think you are. You're just a human being that's going to be vulnerable. And then we can build trust, and we can start talking to one another, start to relate to one another. But I do say that please do not come into the community wanting to engage them, because they really need to happen. And see the results, nothing has changed. That's why this third story, I call it the third story, the Reconnecting Communities branch story. It has to be the new way of doing something different.